We're learning the second Sikha of Parshas Boy in Chelek Tezayim, page 102. This shir is being learnt Lil Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rab Menashe Koltman. The Sikha here is quite a long Sikha. The Rebbe is going to discuss the Korban Pesach, both the Pesach Rishon, as far as the actual Shechita of the Pesach, and then the Achila, the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach, and also the Pesach Sheni, which has both of these mitzvahs. And then the Rebbe will also discuss the halal that we say when you shech the Korban Pesach, and the halal that you say when you eat from the Korban Pesach. And there's certain differences between the Korban Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, as we'll see in the Sikha here. In the Heilige Sedre, beim Zivui of Korban Pesach, was the Eibishter hat angesagt zu Moshe Rabbeinu. In this week's parsha, we have the mitzvah of Korban Pesach that the Eibishter tells Moshe Rabbeinu. So zog the pasuk says as follows: on the 10th day of this month, on Yud Nisan, every family should take a lamb for the Korban Pesach. In the Vayte the Psukim, and then it later says, you should keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then on the 14th day, everybody has to shecht the Korban Pesach. That's one mitzvah. And then it says, V'ochlu es habasar ba'layla hazeh tzli eish u'matzes al meroidim yechluhu. And then you eat the meat from this carbon, has to be roasted, and you have to eat it together with the matzah and the maror. The Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs rechent the mitzvah from Korban Pesach for zwei mitzvahs. So the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, when he brings these psukim, so he counts the mitzvah of Korban Pesach that it contains two mitzvahs. A mitzvah lishchait seh Pesach b'yom ha'ba'asa b'nissen bein ha'arbayim. One mitzvah is to shech the carbon, which is to be done on Yud Daled Nisan in the afternoon. And v'hu amra yisale, this is what the Eibishter says in the pasuk, v'shachtu oise kol kaladas Yisrael bein ha'arbayim. On the zweite, the second mitzvah the Rambam counts is lechol keves ha'pesach b'leil chamish asa b'nissen b'tnov ha'niskarim, that you eat from the Korban Pesach on the 15th at the night, on the Yom Tif, with the conditions mentioned in the pasuk, which is the tzli eish, and with matzah and maror. V'hu amrei, and this is what the pasuk says, v'achlu es habasar b'layla hazeh. Two mitzvahs, shchita and achila of the Korban Pesach. Fragt men deruf the kashya, so the question is asked on this, and this is a question that was asked by Rab Daniel Abavli. There's a sefer called Maise Nisim, where Rab Daniel Abavli asks Rab Avram ben Rambam various different questions on the Rambam's opinion, and he asks some questions about how the Rambam counts mitzvahs in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, based on the rules that the Rambam himself wrote in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, what you should count as a separate mitzvah and what you shouldn't. So he asks him over here regarding the fact that the Rambam counts the mitzvah of Korban Pesach as two, the shchita and the achila. So the question is, the Rambam hat allein gegeben dem klal. The Rambam himself says the rule regarding mitzvahs. As kol ma shebal chachamim boi maimer, ki inyan ploini uploini me'akven zeh zeh. Anytime chachamim come and tell us clearly that you have two mitzvahs, or two parts of a mitzvah it should be, that are dependent one on another, you can't do one without the other. Barur ki hu mitzvah achas. So it's clear that it's one mitzvah. V'chein, and so too, kol asher yizbar lecha, everything that's explained. Ki atachlis hamavukish lo yagia b'chelik echad me'elo achalokim, that the purpose will not be fulfilled with just one part, but you have to have the other part as well. So then, as gam ken adova barur, it's clear ki kibutzon huwa inyan asher yimneh, that bringing these two details together is what should be counted as one mitzvah, not two separate mitzvahs. That's the rule that the Rambam says. So if so, the question is, Hind vibalt as by Korban Pesach paskin the Rambam. So over here regarding Korban Pesach, the Rambam tells us as on achilas ha-Pesach is nechayach the mitzvah from Korban Pesach. Without having the possibility to eat from the Korban Pesach, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of shechting the Korban Pesach. So what's the actual halacha that the Rambam says? Nimnu olav. People were counted to participate in a Korban Pesach. And as the halacha is, if in Korban Pesach, you can't come and eat from a Korban Pesach unless you were counted on it from before it was shechted. You can't just decide to come and join any group to eat from an animal of the Korban Pesach. You have to have been joined in this group, which is called the Menuyav, from before the Shechita. So if people will count on this animal of a carbon pesach, and v'chazru acherim v'nimnu olav, and there were additional people that came and were added to the group, Rishayim, the first people that were joined in this group, Sheyeshlem kezayis, so they have enough of a kezayis from the meat of this carbon to eat from it. Oichlim upturim asayis pesach sheni, so they can eat from the carbon and they're potter from bringing a pesach sheni. Ve'achrayim, however, later people that came and joined the group, sherabu achalinimtze by kezayis, and there are so many people now that there's not enough of a kezayis for them to eat, l'cholechot, for everybody. Einon oichlin, so they don't eat from the carbon pesach. V'chayav las is pesach sheni, and they'll be obligated to bring a pesach sheni. So what do we see here? Even if you could have joined in the group for the shechita, but when it comes to the achila, there's not enough meat for you to eat, so then you can't be yaitze the mitzvah with the shechita. You must have the achila as well. Like the rule that the Rambam says, when you have two parts and one is ma'akiv the other, one is dependent on the other. So if so, darf the chayis come in, so it should come out that the halacha here should be as shchitas und achilas ha-pesach zenen mitzvah achas. Shechting the carbon pesach and eating the carbon pesach are part of one mitzvah. Einfach was teilte sie in zwei besondere mitzvahs. So why does the Rambam split it into two separate mitzvahs? Nachmer, the question goes even further. Even according to those opinions that are brought in the Gemara, which the Rambam does not paskin like those opinions, but even according to those opinions, as achilas ha-pesach is nit ma'akiv di akrava, that having the ability to eat from the carbon does not prevent you from participating in the shchita of the carbon to be yaitze the mitzvah just with the shchita, is doch aber, but even according to their opinion, their teichen, their tachlis from mitzvahs hakravas ha-pesach, verbunden mit achilas ha-pesach. Nevertheless, they will agree that the purpose of shechting the carbon pesach, the entire point of this carbon is that you should have what to eat from it. You should eat from the carbon pesach. Yes, it's true, they hold that the bepoil, if for whatever reason you couldn't, you were yaitze the mitzvah just with the shechita. But the purpose of the pesach is the achila of the carbon. The carbon pesach is being brought as a carbon in the first place for the purpose to be able to eat the meat of it at the following night. And therefore the halacha is a pesach shaba betumah, a carbon pesach that's brought betumah. This is when the tzibur is tameh and you're allowed to bring the carbon pesach betumah. Nechal betumah. It could also be eaten betumah. We don't say that the shechita pushes off the tumah and it can be brought betumah. But to eat the carbon pesach, you could only eat it if you're tahir. We don't say that. If we allow you to shecht it, we have to allow you to eat it betumah as well, because the whole purpose of the shechita is the eating. So this is according to everybody. The whole mitzvah of carbon pesach is for the purpose of achila. Nobody disagrees with this. The only question is if it's ma'akiv. B'diavad, if you couldn't eat it, well, you have to bring a Pesach Sheni or not. But since everybody holds that this is the purpose of the carbon Pesach, is favos zon ze nit starve werden als ein mitzvah. So why shouldn't the shechita of the carbon and the achila of the carbon be combined as one mitzvah? This is the question of Rabbi Daniel Abavli. Farenfet of them, Rabbi Avram ben Arambam. So over there in the Sefer Ma'aseh Nisim, so Rabbi Avram ben Arambam answers them as follows. As der einteilen in zwei mitzvahs, the reason why it's divided into two separate mitzvahs is to leave them, was die Schchite is abhängig in eins man und die Achille in an anderes man. We see that the Schchite is dependent or has to be fulfilled in one time, and the Achille, the eating of the carbon, has to be done in a different time. Mitzvahs ha-Schchite is b'yoyim arba'asar. The Schchite is done on Erev Pesach, on Yudal Nissen. Und mitzvah achila is beleil chamishasar, and you eat the carbon the following night on the yontiv of leil chamishasar. So it's two different times. Because it's two different times, we divide it into two different mitzvahs. Furthermore, und noch was teilt sich voneinander, what divides the shchita and the achila into two mitzvahs. Shchitas ha-pesach is a mitzvah sheyesh ba koris. The mitzvah to shech the carbon pesach that lies upon every yid is a mitzvah that if you don't fulfill this, there's a punishment of kares. The kegin, on the other hand, is achilasai gleich zu andere mitzvahs asay. Eating the carbon pesach is the same as all other mitzvahs asay, but then nit gebunden mit an einish from kares, that do not have a punishment of kares that comes with them if you don't fulfill it. Oiber at makriv gewen, dem carbon pesach bis manei. If one brought the Korban Pesach in its time, in other words, the Shechita, und hat ihm nicht gegessen beleil Tezvav, but he didn't get to eat from the Korban the following night on Tezvav, hat Mekayim gewend the mitzvah von Shchitas HaPesach, he fulfilled the mitzvah of shechting the Korban Pesach, und is potter from Kodesh, and therefore he'll be potter from Kodesh, because he did do this part of the mitzvah, und darf euch nicht bringen kein Korban Pesach Sheni. And he actually does not even have to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. So here I see that the Shechita is separated from the Achila. Once you did the Shechita, and for whatever reason you couldn't eat from it, you're already potter from the Kodesh, and you're also potter from bringing a Pesach Sheni. Even though the purpose of the Shechita is for Achila. But nevertheless, just with the Shechita alone, you already become potter from Kodesh. And in the Ha'aras, the Rebbe explains, so then why is it, if someone that gets counted in a group, and there wasn't enough meat for him to eat, is he not going to be Yaitze the mitzvah, not even the Shechita either? And he's going to have to bring a Pesach Sheni. If we see here, if you do the Shechita alone, you don't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. So the Rebbe explains that must be a condition in the Shechita. You have to have the potential that there's enough meat for you in this carbon at the time of Shechita, so that the Shechita should be for you, that you should be Yaitze with the Shechita. If there wasn't even enough meat for you at the time of the Shechita, not even potentially to be able to eat from it later, so then you're not even Yaitze with the Shechita. But if there was enough meat for you in this carbon at the time of the Shechita, and then for whatever reason you did not eat from the Korban Pesach later, so you were Yaitze, your mitzvah, at least the main part of the mitzvah, that you won't be getting any Kodesh, and that you won't have to do the Pesach Sheni just with the Shechita alone. So therefore, the Achila and the Shechita are counted as two different mitzvahs. This is the answer of Rabbi Avram ben Rambam. Es ist aber noch alt nicht glattig. However, this is not yet an answer that's fully smooth here. So according to what Rabbi Avram ben Rambam is saying is mevue be'iker. So primarily the point that you see from what he's saying is as leitas Rambam is achilas haPesach bepoyol nit ma'akiv. The actual eating from the Korban Pesach is not ma'akiv the Shechita. The Shechita is done in one time period. The Shechita is done, and once it's done, there is no Kodesh. The achila bepoyol is not going to be ma'akiv the mitzvah of the Shechita. That's what you do see. Or maybe to put it in different words, as you see in the Ha'aras from the Rebbe, according to Rabbi Daniel Abavli's question, his approach was the achila is like a chelek of the whole akrav of the carbon. The akrav of the carbon has the Shechita part to it, and has the achila part to it. Without the achila, your hakrava of the carbon is incomplete. So therefore it's mamish like one thing. It should be counted as one mitzvah. The point that Rabbi Avram Rambam is being mechadish is the hakrava of the carbon is the Shechita alone. And therefore it has its own time period. And therefore once that's done, there's no kodesh. Then yes, the purpose is the achila. But the achila is in a different time period. And for the achila, if you don't eat it, there is no kodesh. So therefore we see that the achila b'poyol is not integral to the actual Shechita itself. That's the point that he says why it's a separate mitzvah. But the Rebbe says the question still remains as follows. However, since, as was pointed out in the question, the achila is doch fort der tachlis from Shchitas HaPesach. Everybody agrees that this carbon is different than other karbanis. It's the eating of the Korban Pesach which is the entire purpose of the Shechita in the first place. Und der Rebbe darf sein roi la'achila b'shas akravasei. This point that Rambam clearly says, and nobody argues about this, that at least you have to have potentially the possibility that there's enough meat for you to eat from the Korban Pesach at the time of the Shechita. Why is that important? Because the mitzvah of Korban Pesach is being brought for the purpose of achila. So everybody agrees that that is the purpose. Haben sie gedacht, verrechnet werden wie eine mitzvah? So if so, it should still be counted as one mitzvah. Wie der Rambam allein schreibt in Sharshei mitzvahs, as the Rambam himself tells us the rule when he gives us the different rules regarding what you count as a mitzvah, as a separate mitzvah, and what not. Sha'afila hachalokim she'eino maktim zeh. You find different parts of mitzvahs that are not dependent on one another. You can do one without the other. But nevertheless, pa'amim yiyom mitzvah achas, sometimes they will be counted as one mitzvah, keshiyeh ha'inyan echad, when you have two parts that make up one point of a mitzvah. They bring together just one mitzvah. So even if you can do the mitzvah with one part and the other part is not ma'akiv. So I believe the example for this is tzitzis. By the mitzvah of tzitzis, it has two parts: the strings and the tcheles that you put into the tzitzis. The tcheles is not ma'akev. Bisman hazeh, we don't have the tcheles, and we still do the mitzvah of tzitzis. But nevertheless, the tcheles is not counted as a separate mitzvah, because it's all part of one and the same mitzvah of putting the strings into the four-cornered garment. So the same thing over here. Even if Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam proved the point that the shechita is separate in the timing of it, it's separate also in the fact that there's no kares after you did the shechita, but nevertheless, no question that the point of the whole shechita is for the achila. So if it's one point, if it's one inyan, why shouldn't it be counted as one mitzvah? Oich, dem tam as shchitas ha-pesach va-achilasa is eine besondere mitzvahs. The reason Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam says that they're separate mitzvahs, weil jeder von zij hat ihr besonderes man. So the first reason he gives is because you see that each one has their own time when it's done. Fadet hasbare, that needs additional clarification. Warum? We find many different mitzvahs. In Ha'ara 18, the Rebbe brings you the examples: Kriya Shema, the Karbanas Tamid, the Ketayres. Was die Pratia mitzvahs haben besondere Zeiten von Chiyuv, that the details of when the mitzvah is fulfilled has different times in it, und sie sind nicht ma'akev einer dem Zweiten, and also they're not even ma'akev one another, and nevertheless, und von deswegen rechnen sie der Rambam als ein Mitzvah. They're counted as one mitzvah, as the Rebbe brings in Order 20. Kriya Shema is counted as one mitzvah. Ketayres, the Tmidim, they're all counted as one mitzvah, even though you have the Kriya Shema at morning and the Kriya Shema at night. It's specifically divided into separate mitzvahs, into separate times, that is. And they're not ma'akiv one another. But nevertheless, it's counted as one mitzvah. So the fact that the shechita of the carbon is Yudalit, and the achila of the carbon is in a different time of Tezvav, is not at all a sufficient reason to count it as two separate mitzvahs. So what's the pshat and what Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam was saying? As you could see over here in this sikha, there's many footnotes. If you really want to experience the sikha and see everything and the richness of the sikha and all the chidushim of the Rebbe, if you have time to learn all the footnotes, it would be great. That man das verstehen, behagt ihm noch a Scheile, was man kann fragen in dem. So we can answer this by first prefacing another question we can ask regarding the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach. Beim Korban Chatas steht in Pasuk. Regarding a Korban Chatas it says, Tishchat ha-chatas, you have to shech the chatas, ha-kayin ha-machata isa yechleno. And then the kayin has to eat from it. So it seems like that there's a mitzvah of shchita and now there's a mitzvah of achila here. Von deswegen rechnet nicht der Rambam achilas achatos als a mitzvahs asei bechatas b'fnei atzmai. The Rambam does not count the mitzvah of eating the korban chatos as a separate mitzvah from all the other mitzvahs of eating from korbanos. Nor is das kailul zusammen mit achilas shar kachim. The Rambam counts it and includes it together with the mitzvah of eating all kachim. It's one general mitzvah, that the kachim that are brought in the Beis HaMikdash, you have to eat them. What do you do with the meat from the carbon that's not brought in the Mizbeach? The Kohen has to eat it. It's all counted as one mitzvah. As the Rebbe here quotes, Shetziva Kohenim lechol psar kachim. You have to eat from the kachim. Koloimar hachatos v'ha'osham shein kachim kachim. Those are the two karbanis that are kachim kachim. V'shar kachim. Koloimar kachim kalim. Achilosan gam ken nigredes achara mitzvah. The achila of those kachim are also part of the same mitzvah. So it's all one general mitzvah. Is nicht verstandig. So if we see that the achila of all kachim are counted as one mitzvah, so the question is, Favas rechnet der Rambam achilas Pesach als mitzvah sasei b'fnei atzmai. So why is eating from the Korban Pesach counted as a separate mitzvah? Und nicht als a prat von der klolesdige mitzvah von achilas kachim. Why isn't it included in the general mitzvah of eating kachim of all karbanos? Was Pesach is oich kachim kalim. Pesach is also from the karbanis, kachim, kalim in the Beis HaMikdash, that you have to eat from it. There's the mitzvah that the Kohanim eat. There's the mitzvah of what the Bailim, the owners of the carbon, eat from it. So why is the Korban Pesach, the achila of the Korban Pesach, not included in the general mitzvah of eating kachim? Is the beer in them? So the answer for this is as follows. So once we'll understand the explanation of why the achila is counted as a separate mitzvah, not included in the general mitzvah of achilas kachim, we'll automatically understand why the achila of the Korban Pesach is unique separate mitzvah, and it's not part of the mitzvah of the shechita of the Korban Pesach. The Rambam Alein is das Masber b'diuk l'shaynai. The Rambam himself explains this if you look in the precise wording that he says when he counts the mitzvah. Shetzivanu lecha b'sar Pesach b'leil chamisha asar minissen. The Eibusha commanded us to eat from the Korban Pesach when chamisha asar b'nissen b'tnoa v'niskarim, with the conditions mentioned before, and v'hu she'iyeh tzli is to be roasted, v'sheyechel b'bayis echad, has to be eaten in one house, you can't eat it in different locations. V'sheyechal al matzah u'meroirim, and it has to be eaten together with matzah and marer. And v'hu amrei, this is the mitzvah that the Torah says, v'achlu es habasa balayla azet tzli eish u'matzah u'meroirim yechluhu. That's the lashon of the Rambam. So what do you see over here? Das heißt, this means as follows. Der mitzvahs die Torah sagt on atzol tnoim und gedarim in der mitzvah von achilas ha-pesach. The Torah gives us a number of conditions and defines exactly how it should be eaten. Nit wie bei Korban chatas, unlike what you see by the Korban chatas that we mentioned before, wo es steht stam hakayin ha-machata isa yechlena, that the kayin that brought this carbon, so what does he do with the leftover meat of the Korban chatas that was not burnt on the mizbeach? He eats it. By andere karbanis. And similar by all karbanis, it just says that the kayin eats, doesn't give any conditions of how to be eaten. So mit dem teilt die Teure ois dem chiyuv von achilas Pesach als a besondere mitzvah. It's with this itself that the Torah is telling you that this is a separate mitzvah. It's not just a matter of the leftovers of the carbon, so what do you do with it? Go ahead and eat it. No, this is a separate mitzvah of achila with particular conditions to it, the condition of time, and all the other conditions of how it should be eaten. There's a specific mitzvah of achila separate of the hakrava of the carbon, which is the shechita. On azay is esayich b'negeya the shechita from Korban Pesach. And the same thing is also regarding the shechita of the Korban Pesach, that it's a specific mitzvah which has specific conditions of when and the timing that it's done, and therefore it's counted as a mitzvah of shechita of the Korban Pesach. And the same thing is also b'negeya to the achila. That it's not just the fact that the achila of the Korban Pesach has a time when it should be eaten, but it's all the tnoim as well. And that shows you that this is a unique mitzvah of achila that's separate and different from all the other mitzvahs of the achila of the kachim. The Rabbi will explain this better here. Let's see. To say this in a little bit of a different way, ubehesim zum teichen von divrei Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam, and going along with what Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam was saying that we mentioned earlier. Wie bald die Mitzvah Schchite ist angesagt geworden, zusammen und in Verbindung mit ihr bestimmten Zman. Because the mitzvah of Schchite was given, was said, was commanded to be done with a specific time when it has to be shechted. Und die Mitzvah Achille ist abhängig und angesagt geworden, zusammen mit einem anderen, für ihr bestimmten Zman. And then the Achille has its own particular time when the Achille has to be done. Und mit noch Eifane ya Achille. And it's not just the time that it has, but it also has other conditions of how exactly it should be eaten. So what do you understand from this? So just before I read inside, whenever you give a condition of time, time could be something that's very external. It's just a timing of when it should be done, but it doesn't define the action that you're doing. It's just a time when the action is done. But sometimes timing is not just a time, but it also defines the very action you're doing. That this is an action that is defined by this time, that it has to be done particularly in this time period because there's something unique about this timing that you're eating it in. Right? So over here, since we see it's not just the timing, it's the timing that has to be Leil Tezvav, and also all the other conditions of matzah semerayim and the tzli eish and so on. So that shows that this is a unique type of achila. It's a different type of achila that's separate from all the other kachim and even separate from the hakrave, the shchita of this carbon itself. It's a separate mitzvah of achila. Let's see inside. Let's move on. So what we understand from this, as der Unterscheiden Zman, this difference that there is in the timing over here. Zwischen Shchita ha-Pesach, Achilas ha-Pesach, between the Shchita and the Achille, is nit kein klales de Inyan von Achilles Kotchen. is not just similar to what we find generally regarding eating kachim, that this carbon as well has to be eaten. Was b'meile is das euch da in der mitzvah. And therefore here as well, you have this mitzvah that also has a certain time frame when it has to be shechted and when it can be eaten. Al derech b'mi gefind by karbonis, v'zeir akrava dav zayin, dafke by yoyim, v'chayetze b'zeh. When it comes to the akrava of karbonis, it also has a certain time frame. It has to be done by daytime, not nighttime. No, it's even more than this. Das kommt als a geder in der mitzvah. This comes to define this mitzvah, which is mitzvahs shchites ha-pesach, besteht in dem, was man darf es shechten b'yoyim arba asa b'nissen bein arbayim. It has to be done specifically on the 14th day, and in the 14th day itself, it has to be done specifically after chatzais, in the afternoon. Und bei mitzvahs achilas pesach besteht ihr tzivonu. Over here, what defines the very mitzvah itself, ihr teichen v'geder. This is part of the content, and what defines the very mitzvah itself, as medarfes essen b'leil chamisha asa b'nissen. That you have to eat it at the night of chamisha asa b'nissen. Und die andere tanoim anal, and all the other conditions mentioned before. Und mitzad deruf rechnen sie sich als besondere mitzvahs. And therefore, it's counted as separate mitzvahs. The shechita is not just that it has to be done in the time of B'yom Arba Asar. It's connected to the day of Arba Asar. It belongs in the day of Arba Asar, and specifically in the afternoon. This defines the mitzvah. And the same thing also, the achila, it belongs to Chamisha Asar, and it's defined by Chamisha Asar and all the other conditions. Maybe just to put it in different words, comparing it back to the achila of all kachim. So maybe we could put it this way, even if this is not precise, but just to explain the concept here. When it comes to the achila of all kachim, so you have the carbon, the akrava of the carbon, and now you have the meat that's left over. It wasn't brought in the mizbech, so what am I going to do with this meat? So the Torah says, the leftover meat, so go ahead and eat it. There shouldn't be any nicer. Eat from this carbon, the leftover meat that's here. That's the way you could view it when it comes to the achila of all kachim. When it comes to the achila of the carbon pesach, it's not just that I have now the leftovers from the akrava. It doesn't have to be brought in the mizbech. So the Torah says, okay, so the kayanim or the bailim should eat it. No, this is a separate inyan. There's an inyan of achila for itself, that the Torah says that there's a mitzvah of achila that has a unique way of how to eat it and when to eat it, and there's special timing that's connected to this achila. There's a special separate thing defining this achila as a mitzvah for itself. That's the hezber of why the Rambam counts the shechita of the carbon and the achila of the carbon as two separate mitzvahs. So now the Rebbe goes from here and brings this to the Pesach Sheni. Oich beim chiyuv from carbon Pesach and Pesach Sheni, similar when it comes to the Pesach Sheni. Was ladas Rambam is das a regel b'fnei atzmai von Rishon. The Rambam considers it to be a mitzvah for itself. Teilt der Rambam voneinander sein Schchite und seine Achille und zählt sie als zwei besondere Mitzvahs. So there as well, when it comes to the Schchite of the Pesach Sheni and the Achille of the Pesach Sheni, the Rambam also counts it as two separate Mitzvahs. Das ist euch Muvan, like denselben Tam, wie gesagt, beim Korban Pesach von Pesach Rishon. The reason why there, the Schchite and the Achille are counted as two separate Mitzvahs is similar to what we just said regarding the Pesach Rishon. The achila dav zayin al matzah mereirim. When you eat the carbon pesach sheni as well, it has to be with this unique condition of eating it together with matzah and matzah. Und derin besteht der vitzivano. This is what the very mitzvah is. It's not just this side detail that when you eat matzah and matzah as well. That's what the whole mitzvah is about. It's a unique type of eating together with matzah and matzah. Und teichen von mitzvahs achilas pesach sheni. This is part of the content of the mitzvah itself. So it's a unique achila, which is counted as a separate mitzvah. So that we understand. Says Abinit, move on. However, the question here is, Favos vert mitzvahs achilas pesach sheni nit nichlal in der mitzvah von achilas pesach beleil chamisha asa benissen. Why shouldn't the two mitzvahs of the achila of the pesach rishon and the achila of the pesach sheni be counted as one mitzvah? It's both basically the same unique type of achila. Yes, they are a unique achila, as the Rebbe explained. But they're both the same unique achila. But, well, yes, in two time periods, one Pesach Rishon and the other in the Pesach Sheni, but nevertheless, timing alone is not enough of a reason to divide it into two mitzvahs. That we already explained before. So if it's the very same action of a mitzvah, and the only difference between them is the difference in timing, it should still be counted as one mitzvah. as the Rabbi explains it. Although it's divided in different time periods, it's a repetition, or it's the chance for a person that didn't bring the first carbon to fulfill the mitzvah now. It's the very same mitzvah. Achiv, to essen the carbon pesach, al matzah to eat the carbon pesach with the matzah and water. In the nacht, nach der akrove, the night following when you shech the carbon, ubemele kommt dieselbe mitzvah in zwei zmanim. So automatically you have the very same mitzvah, which is applicable in two time periods. If you shechted the carbon on Yudalad Nissen, darf sein der Achille belel Tezvav benissen. So you eat it the following night on Tezvav Nissen. And if the akrav is given by Yudalad Beir, if the carbon was shechted on Yudalad Beir, darf sein der Achille belel Tezvav Beir. So you eat it the following night of Tezvav Beir. But in essence, it's the exact same mitzvah of this unique achila of a carbon pesach. So why isn't it counted as one mitzvah? Nor the beer in them. So here there's an additional point, that the achila of the Pesach Rishon and the achila of the Pesach Sheni are not exactly the same. Hagam v'mot frier geret. Even though, as explained before, zen shchitas ha-Pesach and achilosai, when it comes to the shechting of the carbon Pesach and then eating it, gebunden mit zeir zman. They're defined by their times. Ba'ofen, as das macht sei, zwei besondere mitzvahs. It's not just simply the timing of when you do the mitzvah, but the time itself defines the very mitzvah, so much so that it's because of this that it's counted as two separate mitzvahs. Is da an Unterschied, however, there is a difference zwischen sei in dem Ofen wie die Gebundenkeit mit Zman wirkt und drückt sich aus. When it comes to the achila of the carbon Pesach, there is a difference in the timing, the way it affects the achila of the Pesach Rishon, and the way that timing affects the achila of the Pesach Sheni. What's the difference? The Yom Yudalad Benissen is a Yom Tov Tag, nor to leave them was demolt is Shchitas HaPesach. Yudalad Nissen itself is not a Yom Tov. It is called a Yom Tov, but why is it called a Yom Tov? In the Gemara it calls it a Yom Tov only because this is a unique day that everybody is shechting the carbon Pesach on this day. But the day itself is not yet a Yom Tov. There's nothing special and unique about the day itself. By contrast, when it comes to that night, so of course, it's separated also, and number one, what's unique about Tezvav Nissen, the night of Tezvav Nissen, is the fact that this is the Yontiv of Pesach. This is the Zman from Yitzias Mitzrayim. This is the time that Yidden actually left Mitzrayim. Even das is given zum ersten Mal, the very first time, va'avarti, be'eretz Mitzrayim, ba'layla hazeh, v'yikesi kol b'choir, pasachti aleichem, when there was Makis B'choiris, and the Eibishter jumps over the Jewish homes that had the carbon Pesach and the blood that was on the doorposts. Un leil shimurim hu Hashem la'yitzia me'eretz Mitzrayim. This is a night that the Yidden were protected, and the Eibishter took them out of Mitzrayim. Und der Pasuk sagt, Hoitziacha Hashem Elokecha Mitzrayim Laila. The Yitzias Mitzrayim actually takes place, it considers it that it took place at night. So the night of Leil Tezvav Nissen itself, this is a very unique time period. And that's why it's a Yontif on its own. Und to leave them, it's because of this. To leave them chshivas azman, because of it being a unique and special time, is da dem multi mitzvah von Achilas Pesach. That is why it's the timing for the mitzvah of Achilas Pesach. Right? So in other words, the fact that the Achila is in this time, and the time is not just a time period from when the mitzvah is done, but this very time period defines the whole mitzvah of Achila, is because this time period is a very special time. This is the night of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And therefore that defines the whole Achila. If you're going to eat the carbon Pesach on any other day, so then it's Tama Achila. When you eat it on the night of Tezvav Nissen, the night that Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, this is an Achila of Yitzias Mitzrayim. This is an Achila, a Pesach Diga Achila, because it's Taka the Yantav of Pesach. And it's only because of this that causes the mitzvah of the Shechita to be the day before in Yudal Nissen. So the source of this whole thing is actually the specialty of the night, of the Yontif, and the Yitzias Mitzrayim, and the Achila then. This is all by Pesach Rishon. So here we could see how the timing affects the Achila because of the specialty of the time, that it's actually the night of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And this is by Pesach Sheni. However, this is obviously different when it comes to the Pesach Sheni. Achilasai beleil tezvav be'ir is nit verbunden damit was is tezvav be'ir. The fact that it has to be eaten on this timing of Tezvav Ir is not connected with the fact that there's something unique about the date of Tezvav Ir. Azman from Yontif being the fact that it's a Yontif, a Chayetze Bezeh, it's not a Yontif at all. Nor blois der Far, weil das ist die Nacht, was noch der Akrave von Yudal Dir. It's just the fact that it happens to be the night after the Akrava that was done on Yudal Dir. So the following night is when you eat the Korban Pesach. But the timing of Yudal Dir itself is not a unique time. Und der Ribber kann ot die Achille nicht gerechnet werden als derselbe Mitzvah wie die Achille von Pesach Rishon. So therefore, the mitzvah of eating the Pesach Sheni on Yudal Dir cannot be counted as one and the same mitzvah as the mitzvah of eating the Pesach Rishon. By Pesach Rishon is the Zman allein a prat und Chelek in the mitzvah. When it comes to the Pesach Rishon, so the timing itself is part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. So therefore it's counted as one type of Achila. Aber bei Pesach Sheni hat der Zman allein kein Sheiches nit zum Teichen von der Achila. The Zman itself that it has to be eaten, Dafki Yudal Dir, is just a byproduct. It's just automatic fact because you brought the Korban Pesach, you dalid, so you have to eat it the following night, which happens to be Tezvav. But there's nothing unique about Tezvav here. So therefore, it's not similar to the Pesach Rishon. So here we could actually see a better explanation to understand better the point that the Rebbe explained earlier on, b'nigeya to the Achila of the Pesach Rishon, that it's not doimet to stam and Achila of any of the Kotchim. Stam and Achila of Kotchim, even if it has a time frame to it, the time frame does not define the Achila itself. The Achila is Achila, you're eating Kotchim in a certain time. Mashenke, when it comes to the Pesach Rishon, which is a unique time, a Yontiv, the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim, so when you eat the Korban Pesach on the Leil of Tezvav, it's a different type of Achila. It's not stam, I'm eating supper. I'm eating a Korban Pesach. It's a Yitzias Mitzrayim Dega Achila. It's a different type of Achila. So that's what's unique about the Pesach Rishon, unlike all other Kotchim. And that's what also separates it from the Shchita of the Pesach Rishon. However, when it comes to the Achila of the Pesach Sheni, yes, it is counted as a separate mitzvah from its Shchita because it also has a unique condition that has to be eaten on Matzah and Merayim and so on, whatever conditions there are. But the timing is not a unique condition in it. The timing, it's just as far as that is concerned, it's a regular achila of the time of Tezvav year. It's not the unique achila in that sense. So therefore, Pesach Rishon is one type of achila. It's Yitzias Mitzrayim the achila of that night. And this is the achila of a regular date of Tezvav year. And in fact, today when we celebrate Pesach Sheni, when do we celebrate it? Yudalid year, not Tezvav year, even though they ate it Tezvav year. Because Tezvav year, Bemis is no special date whatsoever. Now from this, the Rebbe will take it to a further point, b'negei to the Hallel. The Hallel that you say, or that you sing, by the Pesach, which is by the Shechita of the Pesach, and by the Achila of the Pesach. And here there's a difference between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Mit dem wird man verstehen, dem Din Hallel bei Pesach Rishon, und dem Chiluk bezeh zwischen Pesach Rishon und Pesach Sheni. With this we can understand the halacha of Hallel by the Pesach Rishon, and there's a difference between the Hallel that you sing by the Pesach Rishon and the Hallel of the Pesach Sheni. Von die Chilukim zwischen Pesach Rishon und Pesach Sheni rechnet the Mishnah. When there's a Mishnah that tells you the differences between the halachas of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, so the Mishnah says as follows. Rishon ton Hallel b'achilasai. The Korban Pesach Rishon, you have to sing Hallel at night when you eat it. V'asheni, the Pesach Sheni, einaton Hallel b'achilasei. It does not need to have any Hallel be sung when you eat it. And then the Mishnah says, Zeh v'zeh, but both the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, tu'unin Hallel b'asiyasan. Do need Hallel to be sung b'asiyasan when you make it, which is when you shech the Korban Pesach, you say Hallel by both the first and the second Korban Pesach. That's the Mishnah. So regarding this, that it says that the Pesach Rishon, so you sing Hallel when you eat it at night, stellt sich the Gemara, so the Gemara stops on this and asks a question, Minan and Mili. How do we know that we say Hallel the first night of Pesach when we eat the Korban Pesach? Rabbi Yochanan brings the source. It says in the pasuk, Hashir yil lachem kelel hiskadesh chag, that you sing to the Eibishter on the night when you sanctify this Yom Tov. Laila hamakudish l'chag, this night which is sanctified as a Yom Tov, ton Hallel. You need to say Hallel here. Laila she'ein mekudesh l'chag. And then when you have a night that's not sanctified as a Yom Tov, ein ton halal, does not need a Yom Tov. And therefore, when it comes to the achila of the Pesach Sheni, which is also eaten at night, leil tezvav ir, but it's not sanctified as a Yom Tov, so then you don't say halal, only by the Pesach Rishon when it's a Yom Tov. That's one piece in the Gemara there. The Nach sagt the Gemara, oif zeh v'zeh tu'unin halal b'asiyasan. Then the Gemara addresses the fact that both the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni, you have to say halal when you do the shechita of the carbon. My timer, what's the reason for this? So the Gemara gives two answers. Why are they both similar over here, that both of them you need the halal said when you shech the carbon Pesach? Either the reason is Laila kamamayit. As we pointed out before, when it comes to night, we're saying that there's an exception when it comes to night. We're excluding the night, meaning that when it comes to night, the pasuk clearly says Kelel Iskadish Chag, that by night you say the halal only if it's a yontif, but not if it's not a yontif. So there we find an exclusion that Pesach Sheni is excluded. But Yaim like Kamamayit, we don't find that it excludes Pesach Sheni from halal when it comes to the halal that's said by day, when you shecht and you makriv the carbon Pesach Sheni. That's one answer. Another answer the Gemara says, Efshir Yisrael sheichten es peschein. Would it be possible that the Yidden are shechting their carbon? Or brings an example of another mitzvah, v'neitlin es lulav ve'em, or they're taking the lulav ve'enoimrim halal, and you don't say halal together with this mitzvah. These are mitzvahs that require halal, and therefore it's a mitzvah the shechita of Pesach Rishon, and it's a mitzvah the shechita of the Pesach Sheni. So both of them require halal. That's the reason why, and that's over here regarding the shechita, they are the same. Those are the two answers of the Gemara here. So before the Rebbe has some questions on this Gemara, the Rebbe first makes an observation in the language of the Gemara. Von dem v'seif tu'unin halal b'asiyasan. When the Gemara addresses the fact that both the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni, both of them you have halal by the asiyah, by the shechita. Fragt the Gemara mit dem Loshen my time. Here, the language the Gemara uses is, the Gemara is asking why. What's the reason for this? Unit beloshen mino anamili. The Gemara does not ask the question, mino anamili, what's the source for this? Vizi fragt, of harishin tal hal bachilase v'cholo. And there's a difference in the language from earlier. When the Gemara was discussing the distinction between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, regarding the achila by night, that for Pesach Rishon you say halal, for Pesach Sheni you don't say halal. There, when the Gemara was questioning this, what was the words of the Gemara? Mino hani mili. What's the source for this distinction? Here, however, when it comes to addressing the fact that Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni are the same regarding the halal that you say by the shechita, it doesn't say what's the source. It asks my timer, what's the reason for this? So that's one observation. Und davon was the Gemara empfet auf dem in ersten Teretz. And also from the fact that when it comes to the first answer of the Gemara, what's the answer that it gives? Based on what it already said before. Laila kamamayit. The Pesach Sheni, the night of the Pesach Sheni is excluded from halal. But yoim loy kamamayit. By day, when you shech the carbon Pesach Sheni, we don't find any exclusion. So the Gemara is already basing it on what we said before, that we have a source for this already. Is mochach, so it's clear, as midashakle v'tarye, that over here, with this discussion of the Gemara regarding the carbon Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, regarding the halal that you say by day, zucht the Gemara zum Masbezayin. The Gemara here is trying to explain the makkeh v'tam favos zeh v'zeh tu'unin. Again, let me read that again. Zuch the Gemara zum Masbezayin. The Gemara over here is looking to explain nit. I think I missed that word nit. Nit der makkeh v'tam favos zeh v'zeh tu'unin halal b'asiyasan. The Gemara is not looking for the source of why both of them require halal to be said. The Gemara doesn't use that language. It doesn't say my timer. Sorry, again, it does say my time. It doesn't say mino hani mili. It does not say what is the source. One is not looking for the source. Rather, nor in was es besteht der Chiluk zwischen Shchitas Pesach Sheni, was darf haben halal, und achilasoi, was darf nicht haben kein halal. Rather, what the Gemara is trying to figure out is, if you just brought me a source regarding the achila, that when it comes to the achila, the Pesach Sheni is different than the Pesach Rishon. So why is it that when it comes to the asiyah, to the shechita, it's not different? That's the main thing the Gemara wants to understand. But the very fact that there's a source for saying halal by the shechita for the Pesach Rishon and for the Pesach Sheni, which would be the Minah Hanamili question, that the Gemara is not addressing. The Gemara is addressing the Maitaima question. What's the reason for the difference we see here? By the Achila, Korban Pesach Sheni is different than Pesach Rishon, and by the shechita, it's the same as Pesach Rishon, that they both say halal. That's the pshat in the Gemara. So now, based on this, darfen verstehen, there are the following two questions. Aleph, number one, favos frek taken niti Gemara minah hanemili v'chayetze bezeh oif dem etzem halacha from tuun and halal basiyasan. So why does the Gemara not address this first question, which is what's the source for the fact that you say halal when you're makriv the Korban Pesach? Punkt v'oif der halacha von der rishon tal halal b'chilasa v'chula. Just like the Gemara asks the question minah hanemili when it comes to the achila at night. And it asks for the source that you say it by the first Pesach, and you don't say it by the Pesach Sheni. Over here, the Gemara skips a step and never asks the question, Minah and Amili, regarding halal by the Asiyah, by the Shechita, the Akrava of the Pesach. Bay is another question. We bald the ganze Shaila from the Gemara, since, as we see, the whole question of the Gemara is nar beneged dem tam von dem Unterschied zwischen Achilase und Shchitase. The Gemara is trying to figure out regarding Pesach Sheni, what's the difference between the Achila and Shchita? Why by Achila is there no halal and by Shchita there is? That's the my timer. What's the difference? It's was empfet the Gemara in zweiten teretz. So what is the Gemara answering in the second answer when it says Efshir Yisrael sheichten es pischayim ve'ein oimrim halal? Is it possible that you shecht the Korban Pesach and you don't say halal? That doesn't explain it. In dem hasbe gefindt benit kein chiluk zwischen shchitas Pesach v'achilasai. This doesn't explain the difference between the shchita of the Pesach or the achil of the Pesach. Die selbe svare kemen lule de miut. You could say the same exact logic, if not for the fact that we already have an exclusion, regarding eating the Korban Pesach as well. Can Yidden eat from the Korban Pesach and not say halal? As the Rebbe points out in the Ha'ara, if the point over here is that the shechita of the Pesach is a mitzvah, so therefore it's befitting that when you do this mitzvah, it should be done with halal, so say the same thing regarding the achila, that when you eat it, it should also come along with halal. So if the point that the Gemara is addressing is to explain the difference, why by Achila there's no halal and why by Shechita there is halal, so the answer the Gemara gives doesn't explain that. The answer just explains why by Shechita there's halal. But the Gemara never asked me Nohan and Mili. The Gemara wasn't trying to figure out the source. The Gemara was asking my timer, what's the reason for the difference between Shechita and Achila? And that the Gemara doesn't answer. There's the beard in them. So to explain this piece of the Gemara over here, it's as follows. And this is connected to the point that we spoke about before regarding the difference between the Achila of Pesach Rishon, which is on a Yontif, and the Achila of Pesach Sheni, which is not on a Yontif. From Pasek Hashir Yir Lachem Keleil Haskadosh Chag. What is really the meaning of this drasha that the Gemara brings that the Achila of the Korban Pesach Rishon requires a halal because it's in a time when it's a Yontif? What we learn from this is nid blois the miut fun laila she'ein b'kodesh l'chag ein tal halal. That when you have a night and you're eating from the Korban Pesach, but it's not a yontif, which is the Pesach Sheni, so then there's no halal. But rather there's something deeper here, connected to the point that we learned earlier. Nor the etzem geder hachiyuv fun halal b'shas achilas Pesach. This really defines to us what is this obligation of saying halal when you eat the Korban Pesach? As das is nit beikir to leave dem etzem achilas Pesach. This pasuk is teaching me the very eating of the Pesach itself does not require halal. Nor to leave them was the achila is in leilas kadosh chag, but rather it's because this is a unique achila in a time of a yontif. The Zman HaGeula and the Nisim from Yitzias Mitzrayim, the time of the redemption and the miracles of Yitzias Mitzrayim, und the Far darf man sagen halal. This is a kind of achila that requires halal. In other words, there's many mitzvahs in the Torah. There is no cloud that every single mitzvah in the Torah requires halal, obviously. There are certain unique mitzvahs that have in it a special concept of praise that's attributed to it that requires halal. The mitzvah of Achilas Pesach on its own would be similar to any other mitzvah that does not require halal. The mitzvah of Achilas Pesach and the Yontif, which as the Rebbe explained already before, is a unique type of Achila. It's a Yitzias Mitzrayim Diga Achila, it's a Geula Diga Achila, it's a Pesach Diga Achila, and a Yontif Diga Achila. This type of Achila requires halal. That's what the Pasuk is really saying when it says Leil Iskadesh Chag. It's not just that there's the Achila, then it happens to also be a Yontif, and therefore the Pasuk says, because it also happens to be a Yontif, therefore say halal. No, you're saying halal for the Achila, but it's for the unique Achila. The unique Achila, a Yontif the Achila, that's what requires the halal. So to say, what this means is, Vibalt Achilas Pesach Beleil Tezvav Benissen, since when you eat the Korban Pesach at the night of Pesach and Tezvav Nissen, is doch bepoil gewen verbunden mit der Geule und Nissen von der Nacht. So it's actually connected to the redemption, the miracles of this night. It's not a regular Achila. What a Mahai time is dass der bestimmte Zman von der Mitzvah von Achilas HaPesach, Kanal. This is, as the Rebbe explained already before, this is what the timing of the mitzvah here is. It's not just simply timing. This defines the very mitzvah itself. Is the far mechuber the Zman mit der Mitzvah miyechedesh shabai when amiris halal is b'shas Achilas HaPesach. So therefore the timing here is connected to the very mitzvah of eating this Korban Pesach, and therefore there's halal here. The halal is for this unique achila of this time when it's a yontif. The phone is verstandig, so therefore this is what the Gemara is saying. We understand from this. B'nigeya zu Pesach Sheni, when it comes to the Pesach Sheni, v'balt as ein mekudesh l'chag. There, since we eat the Korban Pesach Sheni in a time which is not a yontif, leil tezvavir, is doch nit gewen kein Zman von Nissim. It's not a time of miracles. Und the far vermokten it kein chag teichen. So therefore this time itself does not have any content of a yontif. The Ribber is the Achilu from Pesach Sheni, ain't ton halal. So therefore, Pesach Sheni, this is a regular Achila in that sense, as far as the timing and the specialty of the Geula and the Nisim. So therefore, it does not require halal. Vibalt, the Achila Keshala Atzma is nit genug sibit so amiris halal kanal. This pasuk is teaching me that this mitzvah of Achila in itself is not a mitzvah that necessitates halal for it. Only if it's a unique, a special Geula dega Achila, so to speak. That's the pshat in the Gemara over here, B'nigeya 2, the question the Gemara asks, Minoan Mili, to explain what type of a mitzvah requires halal and what type of mitzvah does not require halal regarding the achil is concerned. Now, noch in Teretz on the Gemara, after this answer, Ubehemshach zum Bir Anal, and following, the Gemara continues with this explaining this point, stellt sich the Gemara, so now the Gemara comes and asks, when the Mishnah says that when it comes to the shechting of the Korban Pesach, so they both, the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, require halal and frekt, my time, and here the question of the Gemara is, my time. The Gemara does not ask the question, Minoan and Mili. The Gemara is asking, my time, but what's the reason why they are the same here? And the Rabbi explains, Was ist der Ta'am hachiluk zwischen Shchitas HaPesach mit Halal und Achilasai? What's the difference between the Shchita, as far as the Halal is concerned, and the Achila, which is on Halal? The Shchita is with Halal and the Achila is without Halal. Favazo Shchitasai from Pesach Sheni sein anders von Achilasai. Why should the Shchita be different than the Achila? Die Gemara fragt da nicht den Tam von was Shchita bechlal is ton halal. The Gemara here is not asking what's bechlal the reason that Shchita requires halal. In other words, what's bechlal the source? That Shchita is a kind of a mitzvah that rises to the level that it requires halal. That's not the question of the Gemara. Why not? Warum der Ort auf Azah Shaila is nicht bei der Mishnah. The place to ask this question is not here by this Mishnah, nor beim ersten Mal sagen dem Din von Halal bei Shchita. The place where the Gemara addresses this is the first time, when it's brought that you say Halal by the Shchita of the Korban Pesach, which was already brought earlier regarding the Pesach Rishon. In a Friedige Mishnah, in an earlier Mishnah, over there it discusses the halacha of Halal by the Shchita of the Korban Pesach. So over there is the place to address why Shchita of the Korban Pesach is a mitzvah that rises to the level that it requires halal. That's not the question here. In der Mishnah, however, here, werden ausgerechnet nor die Prate dinim, it's saying the details, in welche Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni teilen sich voneinander, where you see that there's distinctions between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, bederach memele, euch, and was gleichen sich, and it also discusses things that they are similar in Halal by Shchita and Azay Vaite, that regarding the Halal by Shchita, they are the same. Was auf dem kommt die Shaila, my time. So following up to what it said before, that by achile they are different, and with the explanation that the Gemara gave, so another question is, so why regarding the shechita are they the same? So therefore the Gemara only asks the question, my time. And what does the Gemara answer? When the Gemara is mevayer, and the Gemara explains, as the geder from amiras halal b'shchitasai, that when it comes to define the halal that you say by the shchita is an anderer via amiras halal b'achilasa b'layla. It's different than the halal that you say by night by the achila. Different definition of halal, and therefore we understand why over here the Korban Pesach Rishon and Sheni will be the same. So the Gemara gives two answers for this. The teretz, the first teretz, the Gemara says, Laila kamamayit, yoim loy kamamayit. Only by night is there an exclusion, but for the halal said by day, by the shechita, there's no exclusion. What does this mean? Amiras halal balayla is verbunden mit dem Tam von es Kaddish Chag. Und der Far is memamayit Laila from Pesach Sheni. When it comes to the halal said at night, the achila itself it does not require halal. It does not rise to the level of a mitzvah that you should have to say halal. It's just because it's a yontiv de achila, it's a special achila, that's the source for the halal. So over there we understand why the achila of Pesach Sheni is excluded. Aber amiras halal b'yoim, when it comes to the halal that you say by day, by the shechita, is nit verbunden mit dem Zman mitzad atzmai. It's not connected to the timing of the day on its own that's special. The halal is not because of the uniqueness of the day of Yud Daled Nisan. It isn't unique. And the far is loy imit. So therefore over here there's no reason to exclude the halal. This haste, in other words, the point here is that the teretz is be'ikim madgish. The first teretz is primarily coming to emphasize the point, dem shinui van amiras halal bayayim legabe amiras balayla. Showing you the difference of the source of the chiyuv of halal by day from at night. When you see the reason for what obligates to say it by night. So automatically you understand by negating that, because that does not apply by day, as amirase bayayim is nit mitamas kadesh chag. That by day, that reason does not apply. And the far is nit talking chilek zwischen yayim from Yudalad Nisan, Pesach Rishon, and yayim Yudalad Ir, Pesach Sheni. So automatically you understand that there is no reason to distinguish between the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni as far as the shechita is concerned. So in simple words, when the halal is based on the uniqueness of the time, and therefore it makes it a special achila, so then you have a distinction between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And that's the pshat of the miyat of the Gemara, Leil is Kaddish HaChag. When it comes to the daytime though, since the chiyuv of the halal here is not connected to something that's unique about the timing, it's just the shechita itself. The shechita itself is a kind of mitzvah that requires halal. So why should we distinguish between shechita of Pesach Rishon and shechita of Pesach Sheni? That's the first teretz. So, but the main point though is b'derech shlila, the Rebbe says, by negating, by pointing out that the unique obligation of halal of by night does not apply by day, so automatically we understand that there's no reason to distinguish between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni as far as the shechita is concerned. The zweite teretz, the second answer is emphasizing another point here. Efshe Yisrael sheichten es pescheyen ve'ein oimrim halal. Is it possible that Yidden are shechting the Korban Pesach and they don't say halal? It's madgish. This answer is coming to emphasize their tam from amirasei bayayim. What is the source and reason of why you say it by day? As amiras halal bayayim is verbunden mit shchitas ha-Pesach. That it's the Korban Pesach which is the reason for the halal. Efshi Yisrael shechtin ve'ein oimrim v'chulu. How could you shecht and not say it? The shchita requires halal. Und der Fall ist verstandig, als man darf sagen halal bei Shchitas Pesach Sheni, Punkt, wie bei Shchitas Pesach Rishon. So it's automatically understood that it applies equally by the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So in other words, really this is sort of two sides of the same coin. In the first answer, the Gemara is emphasizing sort of the negative, that the day does not have the unique quality that it has at night. So therefore, by Pesach Rishon, there's a reason to say halal by night for the unique quality that it has by night. And that does not apply by day. And so therefore we understand when it comes to Pesach Sheni, by night it's excluded from the halal because it doesn't have that unique quality of at night. But by day, there's no reason to make a distinction. So just by by process of elimination, in other words, by just saying that the daytime does not have that unique quality of at night, we understand that by day there's no reason to make a distinction between the halal of the shechita of Pesach Rishon and shechita of Pesach Sheni. Whereas in the second answer, it's emphasizing the other side of the coin. So what is the source of the halal of the shechita? The source is the shechita itself. The shechita is a kind of mitzvah that rises to the level that it requires halal. Shechita must have halal. Like lulav must have halal, shechita must have halal. So therefore, if the shechita requires halal, you don't need any other unique thing about the timing for it to require halal. Shechita requires halal. So if so, the halal by Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni is the same. There's no reason to distinguish between them. Okay, so the Rebbe concludes over here the second answer. Anders is aber amiras halal by achilas pa Pesach Rishon. However, when it comes to the halal that you say by the Pesach Rishon, was the achila gufa is nit maspek to kanal. The very eating itself does not rise to the level. It does not require halal. Nor does is mitam his skadesh chag kanal. Rather, the reason why you say halal is because it's a unique achila. It's a achila in a time of a yontif. Und der Fahr ist bei Achilas HaPesach Belel Tezvav Ir Nitshayach Ken Amiras Halal. So therefore, when it comes to the halal, when it comes to the Achila of the Pesach Sheni on Tezvav Ir, so there's no reason to say halal. It's not a yontiv at all. So now l'chayr it comes out that both of these tirutzim are really saying the same point. It's two sides of the same coin. You're just saying that daytime, when you shech the Korban Pesach, it does not have that uniqueness of at night. That's sort of the negative aspect of this. And then you say the other side of the same coin, or the other point. So what is the source of the halal? It's not the uniqueness of the day, but it's the shechita. And in the shechita, they're the same. So these two answers, are in the end of the day, are really the same point. So why is the Gemara dividing it as two separate answers? Yeshleima, so the Rebbe explains, we can say, as the chiluk tzavishim beide terutzim is, the difference between the two answers would be as follows. Leit nashn teretz, according to the first teretz, is oich amiras halal be'eis shechita. Even the halal that's said at the time of the shechita, verbunden mit dem Zman, mit Yom, it is, the time then is unique, the day is a unique day, al derech wie das is b'chilosis, similar to a uniqueness that there is by night when it's a yontiv, when you eat it. But not in the same way. Mit dem Unterschied, the difference here is what causes the specialty of the day. Was bei Achilosai, when it comes to the eating at night, is the Zman Gufe Asibbe. It's the time itself which is special. This is the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and that is what's special and what causes the Achila to be special. So it starts with the time. It's the time that's special, and it's the time that makes the Achila special. And because the Achila is special, so you have to say halal for such a kind of Achila. Whereas when it comes to the time of the Shechita, mach the mitzvah Shechita dem Zman. Over here, the Zman itself is actually not special. It's just Erev Pesach. It's Yudalad Nissen. But because all the Klal Yisrael is shechting their karbanos on this day, so it's the Shechita that makes the day unique. Durch the mitzvah Shechitas HaPesach in dem Yom, because there's the mitzvah of shechting the Pesach on this day, where the Zman Gufa Azav was ton halal. So therefore, it becomes a special day. And now this special day requires halal. That's what it is according to the first answer. So in other words, in the first answer, the Gemara never said that it's the very shechita itself that requires halal. Why did the Gemara not say that? All the Gemara said is, the day does not have that same specialty of the night. Because the truth is, it's not the very shechita itself that requires the halal according to the first answer. It is the specialty of the day. The only difference is that it's the specialty of the day is not similar to the specialty of the night. By the night itself is unique. It's the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that timing makes the eating special. By day, it's in the reverse. What's special is the shechita. And because there's the shechita of the whole Klal Yisrael on this day, that makes the timing special. So now when you say halal, in the end of the day, the reason you're saying halal is not just because of the shechita, but it's also because of the timing. But it's the shechita that made the timing of the day special. That's according to the first answer. However, according to the second answer, which comes and makes the point that it's the very shechita itself that requires the halal, and it gives an example, just like lulav. It's the very mitzvah of lulav itself that requires the halal. So on Leuten zweiten Teretz is amiras halal nor mitzat shechitas haPesach. It's the very mitzvah of shechitas haPesach itself. Efshi Yisrael shechten es peschayim chuluv hey noimrim halal. Could it be that Yidden shech the carbon Pesach and they don't say Hallel? So it's the very shechita of the Pesach itself, which is a mitzvah that requires Hallel. So that's a subtle distinction here, but a difference between the first and the second answer. Just to sort of correct one thing that I said before regarding the fact that the shechita of the Pesach causes that the Erev Pesach becomes special. It's not necessarily because of all of Klal Yisrael shechting, because in Pesach Sheni it's not all of Klal Yisrael. And still, according to the first answer, the shechita of the Pesach Sheni and Yudal Arir does make the day of Yudal Arir special as well. Al kol panim. So the Rebbe says, be it as it may, as far as the difference between this subtle difference here between the two tirutzim, but what do we understand of all of this? It's verstandig. Leit beide tirutzim we understand according to both answers. Hayais as a tam was Pesach Rishon basiyasi is ta'an halal. The reason why Pesach Rishon, when you shech the carbon Pesach, requires halal is nit the far was the zman mitzad atzmai is hazav was macht the chiv ha'amire. It's not the time in itself which is special that brings about this mitzvah to say the halal. It's the shechita. Whether the shechita then causes the time to become special, whether not, but it's certainly not the time itself that causes the chiv of the halal. Nor mitzat shchitas ha-Pesach shabai. Rather, it's just the shchita of the Pesach. Is move on, as in them, gleichen sich Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So we understand that in this, Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni are the same. Beide sind tun and halal basiyasan. And therefore they both require halal when you shech the carbon Pesach, because it's the shchita itself that's the source and the reason for the halal. Whereas when it comes to the achila, the reason for the halal is the special achila that's caused by the zman. And that's only by the Pesach Rishon, not by the Pesach Sheni, when the Zman is not a unique Zman. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the Hesber of all the subjects that the Rebbe discussed here, al pinigle, both benegayet to the Achila and the Shechita of the Pesach Rishon, why it's counted as two mitzvahs, and why the Achila of the Pesach Rishon and the Achila of the Pesach Sheni are also counted as two mitzvahs, even though they seem to be the same mitzvah in two timings. And the Rebbe explained because the Achila of the Pesach Rishon is in a time of a Yontif, so it's a unique type of Achila in that sense. Pesach Sheni doesn't have that. So it's also a unique Achila, but not similar to the Achila of the Pesach Rishon. And that also explained the halacha of Halal and the whole sugya of the Gemara, what it says regarding the difference between the Halal of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Now to explain all of this in the Al Pi Chassidus. Tzias Mitzrayim is von der Ikke und Klolesige Geschehnissen in dem Leben von Jeden. Tzias Mitzrayim, of course, is one of the most important and most central occurrences that happened in the life of Klal Yisrael. Es ist damals gewähnt der Onoib, this is the beginning, der Geburt, the birth von Am Yisrael, of the Jewish nation. Wenn sie sind von Avdei Parai geworden, Avdei Hashem, where Yidden were transformed from being slaves of Parai to becoming servants of Hashem. Wie der Pasuk sagt, Kili b'nei Yisrael avodim, avadai heim asher tzesi yisam yeretz Mitzrayim. Und wie bald, als Inhalt von Korban Pesach ist das Zugreiten und Zubringen zum klarlisigem Ehen von Yetzias Mitzrayim. So since the whole content of this mitzvah of Korban Pesach is preparing Yidden and bringing them to be able to leave Mitzrayim, as it was then, they brought it right before Yetzias Mitzrayim, this ushered in the whole redemption. So ver and Avdei Hashem, to become servants of Hashem. It's verstandig, so we understand, as euch alle einzelne Inyanim, was the Torah sagt by. So therefore, every single detail that the Torah says by the Korban Pesach, zene nit stam pratim. It's not just details, nor jeder inyan is a klal for sich. Every detail of the Korban Pesach is a very important and general point for all of Klal Yisrael. That is a very central point for the birth of Klal Yisrael. Und das Gufe is the time was dafke beim Tzivi of Korban Pesach. So this is also the reason why we see, but that when it comes to the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, gefindt man in Teira so viel pratim und pratim. It's unusual that we find so many details and further details regarding this korban, much more than any other korban. Und wie man darf ihm zugreiten and exactly how it should be prepared, und wie es darf gegessen werden, and all of the conditions of how it should be eaten. Was man gefunden nicht als seins bei anderen Karbanis, unlike other Karbanis. The mit is mudgish because this emphasizes the besondere chshivus von the pratim by Korban Pesach. There's a specific specialty about all of the details that there is by Korban Pesach, which was in connection with the birth of Klal Yisrael. Shleima, we can say, as this is the time, this is the reason, b'pnimi yisan yanam, on a deeper level, was the akrave und achille from Korban Pesach. Why the akrave, you shecht, and the akrave of the Korban Pesach, and then eating the Korban Pesach, werden gerechnet, jeder als a mitzvah for sich. That's why, al pichsidis, on a deeper level, this is why it's counted each as a separate mitzvah. Warum jeder von sei for sich, because each part of the Korban Pesach for itself is a klal, it's a general thing for itself, und an ikir, it's a primal thing for itself. You can't say that one is a detail of another, and therefore it should be included in the other. Each part is special for itself, in der Zugreiten zum klalisdigen Inyan von Yitzias Mitzrayim, to preparing Yidden for leaving Mitzrayim. And each, the Shechita plays its own role, has its own content. The Achila has a different role. As the Rebbe will explain, I'll pichsid this later, what is the aspect of Shechita in the birth of Klal Yisrael, and what's the aspect of Achila in the birth of Klal Yisrael, as we'll see. But the Rebbe first gives another introduction, another point here. According to this, wird man euch verstehen, was dafke bei Korban Pesach gefindt men as die Tmeim lenefesh Adam zenen gekommen mit der Teine Loma Nigara. Why is it that when the Yidden were Tamei and they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach, the Yidden came with the Teine and they said, why should we be left out? We don't find this by any other Korban that there should be such a thing. Specifically here by the Korban Pesach, the Yidden came with the Teine Loma Nigara. Usually the rule is, if the time of a carbon is gone, so then the mitzvah of the carbon is already bottled. In the time, if you can do the mitzvah then, you have the obligation. If you can't do the mitzvah then, so bottle karbanai. That's usually what we say. When it comes to Korban Pesach, it's different. If you missed and you couldn't bring any of the other karbanis, so you're missing the specific accomplishment of what that carbon does. However, when it comes to the Korban Pesach, this Korban Pesach is so important. This is the most central thing of Klal Yisrael. This is what's creating that transformation from being the slaves of Pare to being the Eibusha servants. It's impossible that this should be something that should be lacking by a Yid. And therefore here, the Yidden demanded, Lama Nigara, how are we being left out of this? Und der Pfarr hat mir die Tmeim lenefesh Adam gegeben, a Gelegenheit, das Mesaken und Maschlim sein bei Pesach Sheni. And that's why this was the opportunity that was given to those that were Tamei, that they can make this up, and they can bring it at Pesach Sheni. Nachmer, and even more so, that Indian is if fil negeya. This concept is so important as das Wert bavaren beike bescheiches ziyichidim. The Korban Pesach Sheni is something that's being given even for just individuals, that they can bring the Pesach Sheni. U'kamaymer azal, as the Gemara says and as the halach is, ish nitche le Pesach Sheni ve'ein tzibur nitchen le Pesach Sheni. Only if you have a minority of Klal Yisrael that could not bring the Pesach Rishon, then they are pushed off to the Pesach Sheni. But if it's a tzibur, if it's more than 50% of Klal Yisrael that couldn't bring the Pesach Rishon, so then they are not pushed off to the Pesach Sheni, they bring the Pesach Rishon. So we see over here that the whole point of the opportunity that the Eibusha gave of Pesach Sheni is for Yechidim, is for people that are not part of the Roiv of the tzibur. If it's the tzibur, if it's Roiv of the tzibur, darf doch nicht auskommen zu Pesach Sheni. They don't have to come on to the Pesach Sheni. They sind a makriv of the Korban Pesach Berishin. They bring the Korban Pesach the first time. In order that this Pesach, Korban Pesach, that's for the birth of every Yid, should not be missing even by one Yid. That even just one Yid should be able to come to be a servant of Hashem. A day, a whole new day was given, a whole new mitzvah was given to be able to bring the Korban Pesach then. Mit dem ganzen Seder Aveda von Kayanim, Leviim, v'chulu, was is the mitzvah verbunden. With everything that goes along with this, all the Kayanim and the Leviim, and everything that had to be when the Korban Pesach was brought. Bis zum Nehmen davon, die klalisige Heira von Yidden Ledeiris, as we see that Korban Pesach Sheni is not just another mitzvah that that the Eibishter gave, but this actually creates a unique and very powerful lesson for all generations, for Yidden L'Deiris, as this is Nitokein Farfallen, man kann allemaal verrichten. The famous saying that Korban Pesach teaches us that it's never too late, and it's not something you should never say that, it's over, it's gone, and give up. You could always correct and fix something that wasn't done till now. So this is unique, what we see over here in the power and the inyan of the Korban Pesach, that therefore the Eibishter gives the Pesach Sheni. So now we'll come back to understand on a deeper level, das was Pesach Sheni ken nor mashlim zayin hakrovas shchitas haPesach unachilosai. So what could you make up? You could shech the Korban Pesach. You could also eat the Korban Pesach. Und nicht die Amiris Halal, was man sagt bei Achilas Korban Pesach in Tezvav Nissen. However, one thing you can't make up is, it's the Halal that you say by the Achila of the Korban Pesach. Weil nur die Akrove und Achila von Korban Pesach sind in Inyanim Kloliyim in der Zugreitung zu werden auf die Hashem. It's only the Achila of the Korban Pesach, and before that the Akrov of the Korban Pesach, that are part of this unique thing, of this central, special carbon of Korban Pesach, that has to be given an opportunity to be made up for someone that couldn't bring it before, to be able to become an Eved of Hashem. But as far as the halal at the time of the achila, that is not something that's unique, that is also included in the Korban Pesach, and it could be made up, and in the Pesach Sheni that is, that it could be made up for a person that didn't have it the first Korban Pesach. What's the reason for this? The beer in them, so the explanation here is as follows. So here the Rebbe will first explain what is these two mitzvahs, the mitzvah of shchita and the mitzvah of achila. They're counted as two separate mitzvahs because they are two unique things in bringing about the birth of Klal Yisrael. In der Achane von Yidden, zu werden Avdei Hashem, hat sich gefordert zwei Sachen. Preparing Yidden to become servants of Hashem, so there are two different aspects that are counted as two separate mitzvahs. Aleph, number one, shechten. You have to shecht the Korban Pesach, which refers to what? Abwarfen, die Avodah Zarah from Mitzrayim. To throw off and to reject the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. Und die Avdos zu Parei, and Bechlal, the whole slavery to Parei. Was das hat gekannt kommen, nur durch Mesiris Nefesh, die Übergegebenkeit zum Eibischen. This only could be done with a self-sacrifice, being completely dedicated to the Eibishter with self-sacrifice. As it was then, very simply, Varam das Nemen, them said, the Avodah Zarah from Mitzrayim, then when the Yidden went and took the lamb, which was the Avodah Zarah of the Mitzrayim, often a hate, and they did this openly, midday, far the Eigen from the Mitzrayim, in front of the eyes of all the Mitzrayim watching them doing this, is given verbunden mit Mesiris Nefesh. It was actually Mesiris Nefesh. So this is the first point. An act of self-sacrifice and self-dedication to tear yourself away from the Avodah Zarah and from the slavery to Parai and dedicate yourself to Hashem. That's number one. Beis, but then the second mitzvah and the second condition here is Ot dem Korban Pesach. So this Mesiris Nefesh of the Korban Pesach, haben Yidden gedarft essen. You have to eat this. You got to digest this. Das heißt, Ot di Mesiris Nefesh of Zayin and Eved Hashem darf werden dam u basar kipsare. Eat it to the point that it becomes part of your physical flesh and blood. Es darf durchdringen, it has to permeate, durchnehmen, penetrate dem ganzen Mohos von an Yidden, the entire being of the Yid, und euch alle seine Inyanim. And also all aspects of the Yid, bis zu die Inyani Achille, down to physical, the eating, the Gashmis, the Gesachen von dem Yidden. Which means that your Mesiris Nefesh shouldn't just be this lofty thing that comes from the highest part of your soul, that deepest level of dedication to the Eibishter. But then the lower aspects of the person's existence, down to his physical, are outside of that. Now that power of the Mesiris Nefesh has to be brought down and digested and penetrate every aspect of the Yidden. That's the second aspect of the birth of Klal Yisrael. And this is a mitzvah for itself. This is its own concept. Bringing down Mesiris Nefesh into the Gashmis of a person is its own accomplishment. It's not included in the other mitzvah of the Shechita of the Korban Pesach. Und wie bald Shechitas va'akrovas ha'Pesach und achilosai mit alle zeiret noyim, sind in inyanim kloliyim. So since the shechting of the Korban Pesach and also the achila of the Korban Pesach are two very important points here, as the Rebbe explained, the far is faran und muzayin a gelegenheit zeit zu mesaken sein. So therefore, there is and there must be a time how someone that was left out of this, how he can fill this in, how he can make this up. So now we'll understand that by contrast, this is not so. The zogin halal b'shas achilas carbon pesach. When it comes to the singing of halal while you eat the carbon pesach, was das is we declared frier barucha. So this obligation of saying halal when you eat from the carbon pesach, as was explained earlier at length, nit tazach was is negeyan gebunden mit netzem achila. This is not that the very eating itself is a mitzvah that requires halal. Nor mit kedushas hayayim from tezvav nissen. It's really the kedusha of the day that requires the halal. The Gemara says leil iskadesh achag. It's the kedusha of the day that then makes this achilas special, and therefore that requires the halal. Was peilt and achilas haPesach musal sagen dabei halal. That affects the achilas haPesach that you should say halal. So therefore, the source of this obligation of halal is connected to the uniqueness of the specialty of the day, not the actual achil of the Pesach itself. Is das nit ken inyan klali in der Zugreitung zu Avdei Hashem. So therefore, the halal, the kedusha of the day and the halal that's caused by it, that's not integral to the preparation that you have in the shchita and the achil of the Pesach, preparing you to become an Eved of Hashem. Undefar is in dem the hechrich zum mashlim sein. So as far as this is concerned, it's not a must to have the opportunity to make this up. By contrast, when it comes to the halal that you say when you shech the carbon pesach, which as we explained before, what's the pshat here? Was das is mitzad the shchita allein. It's the very shchita itself that's the cause for this halal. Das is a chelek from the avodah from shchita. This is part of the avodah of the shchita itself, that it comes along with halal. Not because of the specialty of the time. It's yudalit. Yudalit is not yet special. The shchita itself requires this. The far is das a chelek from the klolos de avodah from Pesach. So therefore, the halal is part of this unique and special avodah of Pesach, preparing a yid and the yidden for the birth of Klal Yisrael. Was muss, mekan, allemal verrichten. And therefore, this is something that must be and can always be corrected and always be made up. And therefore, by the Pesach Sheni, you say halal with the shchita, just like it is by the Pesach Rishon.